WNST, get my Hockey Jones going up in Toronto. I'll be watching a little baseball and basketball up there as well. I'm trying to mix things up here this week. We got the NFL draft coming, and obviously the Ravens baseball season in full bloom. One baseball story that has been coming up again and again, and there's been a lot of tragedy behind the wheel in Major League Baseball in this country, in the Dominican. Lord knows, my relatives down in Venezuela can't even go out of the house, and ball players can't go down there. This guy was down in the Dominican tracing a story. He's like a real journalist, not a toy department guy. He's from Real Sports and HBO. I'm a big fan and admirer of his work, and I'm looking forward to seeing this piece. I have not seen it. It's going to air this week on Real Sports. And if you're familiar with the death of Giordano Ventura, and I think we covered that here, and certainly a guy who was a bit of a villain for Orioles fans, and Andy Marte of the Diamondbacks, we welcome in John Frankel from HBO. He's not on Twitter because he's too smart to give his opinion out on the internet, but he does do that out on HBO, and it's his first time visiting here with us in Baltimore. We're honored and pleasure to have on a guy who you did real news, dude, right? I mean, this sports thing, like, you dabble in the sports thing, but you were sports, then you did news, and now you sort of straddle tough news sports stories, and that's what this is, right, John?
I think that's what this is. This is the perfect wheelhouse for me. I started out as a local sportscaster. You're right. I've covered news. I've been to wars. I've covered hurricanes. You name it. But this is a really nice balance and a sweet spot for me, and I think my colleagues, who many of whom have covered real, what is considered to be hard news. And I think that we've built a reputation on that for now 22 years of doing stories that the genesis of which can be found in sports, but look at the world as a whole, and not to get too lofty and pretentious, but we like to think that we take a little bit longer to look at the story, examine it, discuss it, and not just shoot from the hip.
Well, thank God somebody's doing that, right? I mean, there's a lot of toy department going on, and there's a lot of when a ABC or an ESPN or an NBC, any of them are involved with a league, it changes the story. It just does. I mean, there's a lot of that going on, and there's less real investigative work where the Olympic committees and the FIFAs just run around the world stealing money. And if there's no one there to hold them accountable, then that's a tough circumstance, I think, for everyone.
I think we do, and we have examined all those issues, whether it's FIFA or the IOC or head trauma and CTE in the NFL, drugs in various sports, dog fighting to cockfighting. But, we've mixed in our blend of nice profiles of interesting people in sports, people you may not know that much about other than their appearance on a field or in a uniform. And so I think we found a nice balance for it all. But yes, we've cut our teeth on trying to look at stories as we do with this one of a problem in the Dominican, but we look at it through the prism of sports.
Well, this story here, it showed up on everyone's timeline, right? I mean, young superstar pitcher, and this is on the back end of the boat incident down in Miami with Fernandez, which was unbelievably rocking to Major League Baseball. But this Dominican road story of unsafe roads and people dying. Look, I drive in America every day. It's amazing to me more people don't die here, right? And, I've driven all over the world, as I know you have as well. The piece that I saw in winding this thing up is you riding around the Dominican trying to get to the bottom of how pitchers are dying in a country where baseball means everything, and every time one of these young men die, a little piece of the island dies, quite frankly.
There's no question. You've put that very well. I mean, think about it this way, in a sense. Put sugar aside, because obviously that's a big industry in the Dominican, but the island's greatest export, the crown jewels and pride of the country, is dying. And we shouldn't limit it to simply ball players. They make up a tiny fraction of the bigger problem on that island, which is, again, what Real Sports tries to do, which is look at bigger issues, but again, through the eyes of sports. And we shouldn't put it all on the backs of the Dominican Republic. The United States has certainly had its share of athletes who have found tragedy in a number of different ways, whether it's drugs, alcohol, traffic accidents, the combination of of all those things. So this is not strictly a Dominican problem. However, the World Health Organization does say that through statistics that the Dominican Republic roads are the most dangerous roads to drive in the Western Hemisphere.
Now, why is that? Like, what intrinsically about? I've driven all over Jamaica, and it is crazy. I mean, in Jamaica, people drive on the other side of the road, on the other side of the car, and there's goats running. I mean, I don't think people in this country can have an appreciation for what those roads look like unless you've been on vacation down there to Punta Cana or someplace, right?
I think that's right. And in fact, the number of people that I've spoken to, Americans who have gone down to the Dominican Republic for vacation or otherwise holiday, they often say that the people who run the resorts tell them, don't leave the resort. Everything is self-contained here. There are a number of reasons for that, but primarily they're told because the roads aren't that safe. Why? Things that we take for granted and have for decades now that we once didn't, but we as a country have made real efforts and strides in, is as basic as wearing seatbelts, abiding by the speed limits, wearing helmets on motorcycles or mopeds, and drinking and driving. And those things are a huge problem in the Dominican Republic. And the laws exist, but then you get another issue, and that is the lack of enforcement. So even according to the government in the Dominican Republic, and a minister of transportation who we spoke to, says they only collect on about 7% of traffic tickets that are handed out. And what's the reason given? One, they just don't have the manpower. Come 7 o'clock, there are no people on the street to enforce those traffic laws. Even the lights often turn from red to just blinking yellows. But the other issue is that there is such an issue with poverty and low pay, so that often people tell us the police officers are making so little, and they're living under very tough circumstances themselves, that if they pull you over, 10 or 15 bucks might be good enough to say, hey, be a little more careful, go on your way. And that apparently is not uncommon down there.
Well, we've heard about that, I think, in all sorts of places. When you're told when you're on vacation, that's sort of, the extortion part. What we call extortion, they call, that's just the way we do things, right? I mean, we talked about FIFA at the beginning of this, right? But, around the world, that speaks volumes, but then where does the safety? Did you feel unsafe driving around there? I mean, I certainly, when I've been on islands, even in a cab or whatever, I'm like, I just can't believe I'm going to survive this 3-mile ride or whatever it is. And I'm sure you drove around trying to talk to families and other baseball players as well in sort of researching this story, that this wasn't just sort of some odd, random coincidence that this happened, right?
No, I mean, everybody knows. You talk to people, whether it's baseball players, people at your hotel, people at the supermarket, everybody you speak to knows somebody, not just knows, but has a close friend or relative, family member who has died in a traffic accident. Everybody. I mean, that there was not one person who didn't know. And oftentimes it's 2, 3, even a dozen that they've got close friends that they know. Were we scared? Let's put it this way. My colleague and producer on this piece, Nick Dolan, who put a great deal of time into researching it, made a real point to try and keep us off the roads at night, because people had told us, you don't want to be driving at night. A couple reasons. The infrastructure is okay, not horrible, even according to the World Health Organization, but many of the roads have no streetlights on them, major highways that they have. They don't have reflectors on the sides or lines down the middle so that you can determine where you are exactly. People often, it's very common to see headlights out on vehicles or brake lights out, again, because there's no enforcement. We spoke to Amaury Telemaco, who told a former Major League pitcher who's now with the Pirates and head of their scouting for pitching in Latin America. And he's really made an effort to try and to fight back. It's a grassroots effort, and it's called Ni Uno Mas, not one more. And he was kicked into action after Andy Marte and Ventura died in separate accidents on the same morning back in January. But he'll tell us that this is a huge, huge problem. And one day he's driving down the road. He sees a single headlight. He assumes that it's a motorcycle or a moped, which are very common on the island. And it turns out that it's a big truck that just has one of its headlights out. And obviously that was unsettling to him. And he even talks about that he makes a 45-mile drive to and from the Pirates Academy each day when he's down there. And he says he says a prayer before he gets behind the wheel of the car, because he knows firsthand from family members and others how difficult it is, what the challenges are. And I liken it to this. I don't know if you've ever seen one of these big arcades. One of my daughters likes to get on those sort of life-size driving machines, whether it's a motorcycle or a race car. And it seems like every object comes flying out at you, and you can bang off the walls and then the street lights. And that's what it's sort of like. And I don't mean to make light of it, but that's what it is. Almost like you're on a pinball machine, because there is livestock in certain places when you're out in some of the smaller rural areas that we visited. And then in the cities, it's literally mopeds flying across, cars not following traffic signals, pedestrians darting out at you. And it's really like playing a video game. Everybody says you have to drive defensively there.
We call it like Frogger, I guess is what we would say for guys our age. John Frankel joining us here from HBO and Real Sports with Brian Gumbel. The piece is on the Dominican, and you can find that on HBO this week. I'm a fan of your work, and I know putting this story into perspective and going and researching this story right now. My people are Venezuelan, and I know from being around baseball and being around baseball players, the amount of money, and I know Pedro Martinez has spoken to this and some other people from the island. I mean, you become an incredible target in those societies to go back with that kind of money. I mean, I've spent time in South America. I remember meeting a family in Buenos Aires, and they said, you have to assimilate, because if you're perceived as having any money at all, your daughter's under, is at risk of being kidnapped, or family members being kidnapped. We've had Major League Baseball players in Venezuela, families being taken out into the woods and held captive. There have been crazy, crazy things that happen there, aside from just safety and driving. But it's tough being a star and going back with bags full of money. And I'm not just talking about Big Papi or somebody who's made 150 or 200 million. If you get your first contract in the big leagues, you go back after one summer in America with more money than anyone there is ever going to see.
Yeah, one of the things that you hear, and even for your regular everyday Dominican family, where so many of these ball players come from, they get signed to a bonus of, let's say, even $10,000. That's a lot of money to some of those families. You could even go so far as to say life altering, for a family down there, that to have $10,000. That's the level of poverty for many of the families there. Obviously not everybody. There's lots of people in the Dominican who are doing very well. There's a thriving tourist industry and such. We don't want to say this. The island is down and out.
But it is attached to Haiti. Let's point that out as well, right?
That is true. That is true. But one of the things, and it's interesting what you say, because there was a common theme and we also spoke to Pedro Martinez about this issue. But there's and we spoke to Moises Alou about this. But there's a common theme, which is that the Dominican players who do make it, even to the minor leagues, and then obviously a much smaller percentage that make it to the major leagues, it's not just the money, but there seems to be a lifestyle issue that goes with it. That so many of these ball players, they haven't had the same sort of formal, disciplined upbringing that a ball player in the United States might have. And what I mean by that is they may not have even finished high school. They get signed at such a young age, and then they're brought into one of the academies, and then they see how they do, and then maybe they make it to the minor leagues. So there's a lack of structure that exists there for a lot of these ball players who haven't gone through a high school, yet alone on to college to play baseball. So then they make it to the minor leagues, and if they're lucky enough, they make it to the majors. And all of a sudden, there's a real strict regimen to their lifestyle, right? They've got to be at the ballpark. They've got to be at practice. They've got to be in bed. They've got to be here. They've got to be there for training and so forth. And, uniformly we heard from everybody is when the ball players come home, they feel a sense of freedom, that they're back home, they're back on their familiar turf, they're back on their island,
and they're a conquering hero to some degree in their neighborhood, right?
Absolutely, and you're right. And some of them do have enough money that they can afford, call it a nicer car, a faster car. And with that, with the time down, and again, we don't want to say that this doesn't exist in the United States. We know that there have been plenty of guys in the U.S. who have made similar mistakes. But they go home to the Dominican, they're drinking, there's people who want a piece of them everywhere. Come to this party, come to that party, let's do this, let's do that. And tragically, oftentimes, too many times, it ends up bad.
John, it's great having you on, man. I appreciate the time. I'd love to have you back on sometime in the future. And I know you're out there working on a whole bunch of other stories for HBO and for Real Sports, as well as living your life in the post-journalism era. Man, you miss going back over to the Middle East and running around and doing world news now and morning shows and all that stuff? Or are you done with that part of the world?
I'm done with that part of the world. I'll go there if there's an interesting sports story. But I'm very content and very proud to be working on a show like Real Sports.
Well, hey, it was great having you on, and I appreciate you making some time in and around the holidays, and we hope to catch up soon. Get back out, do some more good, important work, and we'll be following along.
Nestor, thanks so much.
You got it. John Frankel from HBO and Real Sports with Brian Gumbel. You can check out that piece on the Dominican baseball situation, as well as the deaths of Andy Marte of the Arizona Diamondbacks, as well as Yordano Ventura of the Royals, doing great work. There's some other pieces involved with that this week as well. Christy Mack and the War Machine, and let's see what else we're doing here. That's David Scott piece and a special needs piece as well with Soledad O'Brien traveling to Idaho. So I'm reading from the press release, but you know how it goes. Go watch HBO and Real Sports, one of the best shows on television. I think they used to call it the 60 Minutes of Sports, but that's unfair to 60 Minutes because Real Sports is a better show these days. I watch them both. You can find me out in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. The morning newspaper ships to your email inbox at 7 a.m. each and every morning. That's powered up by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life. And, of course, if there's any breaking news at all, you're going to get it first on the WNST text service, including when it's bad news about Zach Britton, as we had to send out on Sunday onto the DL this week. Orioles in Cincinnati. I'm in Toronto. We got the Caps. We got the playoffs. We got the Wizards. We got the NFL draft. We got the schedule coming out next week with that London and, let's see, Oakland, Green Bay, Minnesota, as well as Nashville. We'll be getting those trips out. The London trip now on sale under the Road Trips tab at WNST.net. If you need me, I'm a very available individual. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST's house in Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.